Hey Bethel Youth, I'm so excited that you're tuning in. Whether you're watching online or whether you are at one of our house church locations, I just want to say that I'm excited that you're joining us. And as we start into this message, I have a question that I want you to answer, and it's really simple, and it's this. Who is someone you look up to and want to be like? Or this could be who has been someone that you've looked up to in the past and wanted to be like. So if you're watching this online, drop a comment in the comment section, or if you're at a house church location, feel free to hit pause and go around the room and answer that question. So ready, go. So we took a few weeks off of our study through the book of Galatians, and we focused our attention on the blaring cultural, racial injustice. And I hope that you were challenged, you were encouraged, and you were convicted of our own biases towards people who are different than you. And really the thing is we're not just talking about race. We're not just talking about that. We're talking about economic status. We're talking about social status. We're talking about just all sorts of backgrounds of people. And the thing is you may not personally struggle with prejudice or racism or look at people differently because of their backgrounds. But our country is really struggling with this. And one of the things that we can do is help bring awareness and also pray for healing in the hearts and minds of the people who occupy our nation. And we're going to continue to pray for reconciliation. We're going to pray for peace. We're going to pray for healing. As we just move away from just having a specific sermon series that we're talking about those things, we want to continue to pray for those things because they're still happening. And something we're doing as a church is we are going to be having a prayer rally this coming Sunday, July 5th, as well as July 12th at 10 a.m. at Bethel Chehalis, and we are going to spend an hour just praying together as a church, and we're going to be singing songs together. And I would love if every single one of you came out with that. Bring your families, and we're going to pray for unity in our community. Pray for healing in our community as well as our nation. And so this Sunday at 10 a.m. Bethel Church, Chehalis location. So with that being said, let's jump into our text in Galatians 4 and dig into what we see and what it says. So let's start with verse 12 and we'll go through verse 20. So it says this: I plead with you, brothers and sisters, become like me, for I became like you. And just a reminder, the first person in this is the Apostle Paul speaking to a region of churches, or a bunch of different churches in the region of Galatia. So, you did me no wrong. As you know, it was because of an illness that I first preached the gospel to you. And even though my illness was a trial to you, you did not treat me with contempt or scorn. Instead, you welcomed me as if I were an angel of God, as if I were Christ Jesus himself. Where then is your blessing of me now? I can testify that if you could have done so, you would have torn out your eyes and given them to me. Have I now become your enemy by telling you the truth? And then verse 17, he goes on to say this: those people are zealous to win you over, but for no good. What they want is to alienate you from us so that you may have zeal for them. It is fine to be zealous, provided the purpose is good, and to be so always, not just when I am with you. My dear children, for whom I am again in the pains of childbirth until Christ is formed in you. How I wish I could be with you now and change my tone, because I am perplexed about you. There's a ton here, and just to be completely honest with you, it took me a lot to realize what was being said and understand what was being said. And so I hope that this message is palatable and that we can communicate it in such a way that it it makes sense. And so let's dive into it. Let's try to make sense of this text. And as we do that, I want you to write this first thing down. Follow me towards Jesus and away from bondage. And this is really what Paul is saying. He's like, follow me as I follow Jesus and away from the bondage of living under the law. We all have those people in our lives, and at the beginning of the sermon, whether it was in a house church or in the comment section, we all talked about the people that we look up to and the people that we want to be like. And maybe for you it was an actor or an actress or a Broadway star, a singer, a musician, a video game designer, a pro athlete. These are the people that we want to emulate and we want to be like them. And sometimes we go to crazy lengths in order to be like these people. And some might even say that you go to the fanboy or fangirl status. And to my recollection, I don't really remember much about my childhood, which is kind of funny. I remember cool things about it, but just everyday life, I just don't remember much, and it's kind of a bummer. But anyways, to my best recollection, I didn't have any of these crazy fanboy for a specific person. It was more broad than that. But one thing I do remember is I wanted to ride dirt bikes professionally. My dad rode semi-pro motocross, and so I wanted to be like my dad. The thing is I learned pretty quickly that there was no way that I would ever become a professional motocross rider, but I enjoyed dirt bikes. It was just one of my biggest passions in life. And I was just reminded on Sunday, my 8th grade teacher reminded me that I did this project on motorcycles and was teaching her about motorcycles for a class, and it was just kind of funny and proof that dirt bikes were the center of my universe. But the point that I'm getting at is we all have at some point in time and to some degree looked up to a person in order to find a place or to find an identity. In some ways, we've used those people as a guide of what to pursue and how to get to a place that we want to be. And so Paul is kind of saying, if the goal of following Jesus is to live in freedom and to be a part of the family of God, follow me as I follow the example of him. And that's really what Paul is trying to say. He's not saying follow me and don't follow Jesus. And he kind of made this a little more clear in his letter to the Corinthians. He said this, follow my example as I follow the example of Christ. And so in the letter to the Galatians, what might be some of the things that Paul is asking these Christians to follow him in? One commentator suggests that it could be his consistency and it could be his liberty. Consistency as it relates to them following through with following Jesus and not falling into the traps that the Jews were trying so passionately, so zealously. I think that's a word. I don't know. If it's not, you can look it up, but I just made it up if it's not. But they were trying to set up these different rules and guidelines for these Gentiles, which are non-Jews, to follow Jesus. And so he said in verse 12 that I became like them, meaning he was just like them at one point in his life. And remember, the Galatian churches were struggling with believing that they needed to trust Jesus and abide by these different Jewish standards in order to live for Jesus and be saved as a non-Jew. And Paul was in that world in his former life of Judaism. In his letter to the church in Philippi, in chapter 3, he talks about his former life of being a religious leader, and he was the Pharisee of all Pharisees. He was the Hebrew of all Hebrews. He was the model citizen of what it meant to trust God and be fully devoted to God because of his actions and what his life was like. And what he's saying to the people in Galatia was, I was that person. I was a Jesus and I was a God and person, but it was a dead end. Like this led nowhere, and I thought it was going to lead me to Jesus, but friends, it didn't lead me to Jesus. I missed Jesus. And so now that I have found Jesus, there is no way that I could go back to the shackles of living under a works-based salvation. And so he's speaking to them out of liberty and out of freedom in Jesus, and he's inviting them to do the same. It's kind of like that moment in your childhood when you are like swimming in the shallow end or like the kiddie pool end of the swimming pool, and you're looking at all of these kids in the deep end and swimming around in the rest of the pool. Like you're looking at all the fun they're having with sliding down the slide, they're diving off the diving board, they're splashing and experiencing the ability to go wherever they want in the pool. But where are you? You're stuck in the shallow end because you refuse to learn how to swim. And you're trying to convince yourself like this is okay. It's like that one meme where it's like the dog is in the house burning and he's like, this is fine. You know, you try to convince yourself that the shallow end is the best. Man, this life jacket is so cool. Man, being able to touch the bottom at all times is so cool. Man, I promise I'm having just as much fun. I'm here in the shallow end and not jumping off the diving board or going down the slide. Man, this is so much better. And that's kind of like what, I know it's funny and silly, but it's kind of what Paul is saying. He's like, follow me in liberty and in freedom of following Jesus, not just staying in the shallow end of, but going into the deep end and fully experiencing what it means to trust Jesus only. And he's saying, I'm not your enemy. Like, I know that I used really strong language earlier in this letter, but I'm only saying these things because you aren't following the truth. You're being persuaded and convinced of something that isn't true by people who are really, really passionate. And he described these really zealous Jews in verse 17 and 18. Those people are zealous to win you over, but for no good. What they want is to alienate you from us so that you may have zeal for them. And the interesting thing and the important thing that we need to know here is that they're zealous not for them to know God or to know Jesus. They're zealous for them to be a part of their club. But he says in verse 18, he says, it's fine to be zealous provided the purpose is good, and to be so always, not just when I'm with you. And so he's saying like it's good to be passionate, it's good to be excited, but let's make sure that the things that we're passionate about are actually things that are true and actually matter. Let's remember that Jesus, that he fully fulfilled the law. And so we don't need all of these other things in order to receive salvation. Meaning there isn't this extra list of things that we need to do. Jesus is it. He's everything. The gospel, it's everything. But these zealous Jews were trying to convince and sway the Gentiles away from that simplicity. And sometimes as Christians, we can get mixed up on what is actually something to be passionate about and what is something we need to just let go of. But I think the hardest part is finding what things are gospel issues in culture that need to be addressed and need to be talked about and deserve passion. And to be honest with you, I think what's been one of like the biggest challenges of the past few months is trying to wade through the cultural narrative and find the things that are near and dear to the heart of God and therefore should be near and dear to our hearts as Christians. And I'm just speaking personally here, but I think there's been a lot of stuff and a lot of unnecessary stuff that has caused a lot of division in our nation, but also caused a lot of division in the church as a whole. And so Paul in this text, like he cares for them. He loves them. He wants them to experience, yes, the liberty of following Jesus, but he also wants them to experience the simplicity and the joy of following Jesus. He compared himself in the end of this text to like a mother who's like giving birth to these kids. Like he wants them to become more like Jesus. So I think as we walk away from this text and consider the heart of what Paul is saying, I think we can come to this conclusion. And it's this: keeping the gospel central is worth fighting for and being passionate about. So I'm excited as we move into talking through these small group questions. So whether you are watching online or you're at a house church, we'd love for you to talk with your family about these questions, and maybe talk with your siblings, or break off into smaller groups and talk through these questions. Love you guys so much, and I'm praying for an awesome dialogue.